All right, today we tear into the Cherokee suspension in the rear and find out that things were way worse than I possibly imagined. Stay tuned and go wheel. I went to tear into the Cherokee rear suspension thinking I had bad shackle bushings, and it kind of snowballed. The shackle bushings were a little bit worn out. The center sleeve maybe had a tiny bit of movement, but it really ended up being the fact that the actual shackle mount, the weld nut inside the frame, had ripped apart and had ripped open a hole about that big inside the inside, I kind of call it the frame rail area for the shackle mount. Anyways, I end up going down to Ruffstuff, getting new shackle boxes, cutting out the old ones, drilling out all of the weld, all the spot welds, and I had new leaves for it. What else do we have to do? Oh yeah, and I did find a bunch of frame cracking. So we did the new leaves, the Ruffstuff shackle boxes. I had to kind of repair the passenger side front leaf mount. It was kind of bent up, just I think, whatever, I don't know, wheeling and who knows what. The floor had tons of cracks and holes and rips in it. Tried to repair whatever I could in the floor, just kind of quick and dirty. Did some really lazy frame repair, found a crease in the frame with a crack. Drilled out the crack, did a quick plate over that with took a hole saw and just kind of opened up some plate, made a little piece of cardboard template to get that going. Anyways, the rear suspension did snowball, and then earlier this year too, I did do the metal cloak coils up front, and then we also did just a couple weeks ago did the Bilstein 5165s. Universal valving, 360/80 valving in the front. That made a huge difference. We're also covering today all new steering up front as well. So new Heim joints, a new drag link, a new pitman arm. Got my steering wheel centered for the first time in years. Had the PSC ram rebuilt by PSC. Probably did 15 different toe settings. Finally gave it a bunch of caster. Went from about 6 to 8 degrees of caster. Learned that the axle tube on the passenger side, I know it was rotated and they spun a tube at one point in the past. One of my buddies had actually previously worked on this rig probably 10 years ago before I owned it for the person who previously owned it. And I think he might, I don't know if he intentionally gave it about a 1.5 degrees more caster on the passenger side, but the knuckles have drastically different caster. It's pretty common to give about 0.5 degree to a full degree more caster on the passenger side to account for the crown of the road. So maybe that's what he was shooting for. So I'm not super worried about it. It does drive really straight. I did put my bikini top that I made on it too recently, which is basically OtterTex, which is waterproof canvas. I took some cheap $5 grommets and then a bunch of cheapo bungees and just kind of bungee it wherever I can on the cage. But I wasn't able to take it to Reno Fest for NAXJA. I ended up having some pretty nasty migraine headaches for 3 or 4 days straight all day. Drove my Wrangler out there and just kind of hung out, went to the raffle. But yeah, so anyways, stay tuned. We got some cool stuff coming up. Some work coming up on the Cherokee, front and rear suspension stuff, steering stuff. And stay tuned and go wheel. Thanks, guys. So here I am just getting ready to jack up the rear of the vehicle. Put some jack stands under it, take off the tires, and begin to tear down the rear suspension. Disconnecting the rear sway bar, and then next I will undo the U-bolts after that. From there I'll be just removing the leaf spring bolts, and after that I can drop the axle down and remove the leaves. Well, that's not what I wanted to find. Yeah, that sucks. That sucks pretty bad. Got to fix that. Pretty nice. Welded really well, 3/16. This is gonna be for the passenger side. Looks like it still grabs the 2 bumper bolts, and got a couple options for the leaf. And so I just gotta figure out this puzzle, how it goes on. I mean, it's pretty, so we gotta cut all this stuff off, remove some bolts. Sucks, and then you need to drop gas tank skid in the trailer hitch and hopefully get started on this thing. All right here I'm just removing the gas tank skid in the trailer hitch real fast. I'm gonna see if I could drill out some of these plug welds and get that leaf mount off. Did find a crack in the frame as well, so it's probably a good thing I'm upgrading all this stuff. There's no instructions, so I think I'll just be figuring it out as I go, and trying to repair some of the frame cracks a little bit. I can't really, I'll probably just drill out the holes, try to weld it with my 220 through that super thin sheet metal. If that doesn't work, with the holes drilled out and these extra beefy plates in that area, I'm hoping it's maybe enough to kind of beef up the spring hangers, and these tie into more places, so it should be good. But that's what I'm gonna try to do right now. Let's see if anything works. I removed the gas tank skid and the trailer hitch, and I'm like totally thinking about that metal cloak gas tank skid, but it's really expensive. I gotta look into that. All right, I'm doing a time lapse here, and I'm only doing a small snippet of it, but I spent a very long time trying to drill out these plug welds, and it was very time consuming, and I definitely put a bunch of holes through the frame and through the floor. So just be aware that as you're trying to remove these things, that you're gonna put some holes in the rig. So you can see all the plug weld holes that I just got ready. I kind of drilled all the way through on a lot of these, so whatever, I'll just deal with it. If you're trying to save your floor, you might want to get like a roto broach or something. Yeah, there's like 3 up top, 4 in the middle. All right, I'm slowly figuring out what the bag of stuff goes to. This sandwich is on the top. All right, I couldn't find a spot weld cutter in the garage. I did drill through a little bit. I'm not gonna worry about it too much. I did just grind down these bolt heads with the flap wheel. Tried to clean this up. This stuff was a pain to cut off. I'm not even sure if I should. I'm probably gonna weld these on where I can, but we'll see. The other side's gonna be much harder, but this wasn't the end of the world. If I can find my spot weld cutter or just go buy one tomorrow, I think the time savings is gonna be incredibly huge, so we'll see how that goes too. I grabbed some extra stuff today, a spot weld cutter from Napa, a 3/4 inch hole saw from Ace Hardware, from Hills Flat Hardware, another super long bit for getting up inside the boxes, and then a bunch of 7/16 bits to help open up all the holes on everything on the spot welds. I don't have high hopes for this. It's basically a hole saw, just really tiny baby hole saw. I'm gonna try it out. If that doesn't work, I might try this out. If I start cutting through important sheet metal, I'll stop this and probably just go to these. I couldn't find any spot weld cutters. Locally, I went to Fastenal, Ace Hardware, Hills Flat, Welding Supply, and 2 different Napas. And this is kind of what I came up with. And then I did order some roto broaches on Amazon, and those won't be here till like Monday or something. So, you know, get started with this. Hopefully I drill through the frame less with the other setup on the other side, but whatever. Anything is better than having the old Shackle box totally ripped out, so there you go. All right, right here I'm just prepping some metal to weld, and then right here I am drilling out some holes on the boxes just to make it easier to line up the bolts. So you're gonna wanna tighten these bolts first that go through the top of this, and then these guys are gonna line up, and then you'll get the inside ones lined up. I'm gonna have to re-loosen up the frame bolts, under the frame bolts, because look at that's not lined up either. Loosen those up just a little bit. Use a punch to kind of center it, and then put the bolts through. Then I should be good to go. All right, I got lucky. The bolts I use for my nut strips were longer. The bolts that came with the Ruffstuff kit weren't long enough to engage this bumper mount going through that other side. So I just grabbed some of the bolts that I picked up today for the nut strips. I should be fine for the nut strips with the old bolts, and this should kind of get me by. But I would recommend, if you have an aftermarket bumper, you can see you're gonna want 1/4 to 1/2 inch longer, just so it'll work. Otherwise, you might be fighting that thing. If you have a clean rig, I would get a really nice spot weld cutter. Otherwise, I don't really care how my rig looks, because I did put more holes in it than I wanted, but this should be fine. I'm probably gonna add some weld over here, maybe down here. Honestly, compared to what I had that was destroyed and ripping apart in places, this is way nicer. I tried to repair this side before by adding some random scrap steel. This is embarrassing. I did this a long time ago, real quick in a hurry one day, because someone had cut the frame out right here or something. The frame had creased. I wanted to put some sort of quick and dirty rigidity. I don't think I'm cutting this out right now, but that kind of sucks because I think there might be plug welds behind it. All right, here you can see a lot of the chunks of scrap steel that I had to cut off of the passenger side rear. And now we're going to look at what's left. You can see the old fix that I did for the inside nut ripping out on this side. And yes, cutting out chunks at a time does help a lot, so you can access the welds that you need to drill out much easier that way. All right, I had to extend these holes. I don't think that's nothing to do with rough stuff. My Jeep isn't perfectly straight. I had opened up the holes on the Jeep, and it still wasn't even close. So I just kind of extended these holes. I used some pilot holes with a bunch of drill bits. Then I used a rasp on a Milwaukee M12 die grinder and just kind of connected the two holes. Did some cleanup over here as well. I'm gonna weld whatever I can reach with the welder, which will be like this plug weld, this guy, that guy, and then some of the stuff under here. I'll just try to get that whatever I can. These holes are good. These holes are good. It's hard to see. I had to move my storage box out of the way. You can see the plate down there. It's a little bit moved. I had to notch it for the roll cage. The frame looks a little bit like Swiss cheese right now because I had to drill out a ton of plug welds. And then I also had a giant plate that was right there that I had welded from here to, I don't know, about to the end of the shackle box previously to kind of stiffen it up. And so I need to kind of repair some of this. I kind of pounded it in and out and pulled it in and out and tried to get it straight. And then that's why I'm stoked on the frame plating from Ruffstuff. But yeah, like nothing over here is like perfectly straight either. I mean, this Jeep has seen better days. It's pretty tore up. I'm sure the cage and the frame plating are basically holding it together at this point. I think that's the last of it other than welding and doing some weld repair on the frame before that. All right, a couple things to consider. You might need longer bolts right here. You might need longer bolts right here. Oh, that's not tight. You also might need longer bolts for the stuff that goes inside the top. And you might need longer bolts right here. I've got the roll cage. You might have to notch the plate. I just kind of stuck it over the roll cage plate, notched it the best I could real quick. Not a big deal. I'm gonna weld whatever I can reach. I've got some Hobart 030 flux core for the Hobart 190. I had to cut. If you have frame plating here, you might have to remove it to get this on, which is what I did, which took forever. Here's a couple quick snips of me trying to weld these things in wherever I could reach the frame. Trying to be really, really careful not to just burn right through the frame, which is really easy to do, and I was doing that. Just slapping some paint on it real quick so it doesn't flash rust. We had a lot of rain this year. Alright, so I need to grind down the leaf bushings. The front leaf mounts are pretty bent to heck, and the leaves don't fit at full width, so I always end up having to grind them down every single time I install new leaves, which is about once every year. Alright, so we're putting the leaves in. That part of the shim facing forward because I'm trying to bring the pinion down because my pinion angle was too high. I was wrapping up too much, and so that front mount isn't perfect. I've added some plate to it over the years and tried to stiffen it up. Maybe I'll do Ruffstuff front plates next time, but we got this bad boy in here. Shackle went right in, which is nice. I did some pretty terrible welds through here. I'm not a good welder. I just use flux core. And so that's what's going on. Also, my leaf mount is a little cockeyed, and I usually end up grinding the bushing down. You want it to fit snug, but in this case, it's such a pain in the butt to fight that bushing because the mount's not 100% right, and so I just grind it down. For a little bit of wheelbase stretch, I do use the front hole on the Ruffstuff spring perches, and so that's just to get another maybe 1 inch of wheelbase on this thing. Let's see if this goes in easily or if it fights us. The driver's side went in much easier than the passenger side. On the passenger side, I actually had to drill out the hole and weld up a new weld washer over the outside to get the location right. Perfect. The mounts are pretty bent and tweaked to some degree. If you're starting with a really clean XJ that's straight, you won't have to do funky stuff like this. I just wanted to call that out. This rig is definitely kind of like a really built rig, but it's also a beater. So sometimes I don't feel like fighting the leaf mounts for an hour. I'd rather just grind them down because I know they're I've mic'd them before with the digital calipers and they are too wide. I don't know, the mounts are bent or something, whatever. The passenger side front leaf hanger had to be drilled out. I used the right angle drill with the unibit and then put a washer on there and then welded it in when I was done. All right, what I'm doing right here is taking a video for my own self, and I wanted to show people this, is I'm just taking a video of the order of the spacers between the Heims on the double shear mounts so I don't get them mixed up when I put it all back together. I do this all the time where I take a video of what I'm about to take apart. That way, if I take it apart and do not remember how it goes back together, that I could easily put it back together. But yes, here we are to the point of the video where we will be tearing into the steering on the XJ now. Alright, so I'm unbolting the track bar, putting new FK Heims on that. Found one bad rod end recently on that. Same thing, the tie rod will get new FK rod ends, and then the drag link's going to get one new FK rod end along with a tie rod end and a different weld-in bung and a whole new pitman arm, and definitely redoing a lot of the steering to get it to drive better. Alright, I'm putting the pitman arm back on and clocking it and measuring for the drag link total length. And from there I can cut the drag link down and weld in a new bung for a tie rod end. If you want Heims that'll last a very long time, that are really high quality, use FK JMX or RSMX Heims. Parts Mike here in Auburn sells them. You can get them at Summit Racing too. You can get them on probably Amazon Prime as well. They last forever. I use the tape measure to measure the wheel distance from the frame and then adjusted the track bar accordingly to get it as close as possible. There you go. Well, this is a bummer. So this is the arm I got from Parts Mike. We just kind of blindly were grabbing pitman arms. But if you look at the drop, it drops, yeah, another inch and a quarter from an XJ arm. This is a stock XJ arm. And here's a Dub J arm. This is a Dub J pitman arm from a Grand Cherokee from 99 2004. And the Dub J has the same drop as the XJ arm, but it does have a longer throw. So I went back to Parts Mike today really quickly and grabbed another pitman arm. All right. So one of the reasons I like Parts Mike so much, a pitman arm with no master splines, so you can clock it exactly how you need it. It's already reamed out for 1-ton tie rod ends. This is like on the shelf there. They were telling me that this reamer will work on JL, JK. It's just that it's the same reaming, you just go different depth. So I'm gonna measure the depth on this and log that. I was just turning the wheel back and forth and it looks like the pitman arm will clear, but holy crap, it's gonna be tight. Hopefully that fits. That's full lock. All right, so basically I'm just measuring the length. I changed out the pitman arm and we're also putting in a tie rod end at the drag link. And between those two things, I have to cut the drag link down to kind of make all this work. The old drag link was a little bit longer because the pitman arm was clocked way over. I'm trying to get it right around 37 3/4 or so. Just cut this on the chop saw. I'm gonna measure real quick to see how close we are to 37 inches. This is just gonna help me see if I wanna be at 37 3/4 eye to eye. Feel looks pretty good. We're at 37 3/4 inches that we wanted to be at. I'm gonna bevel this edge. Please never take welding advice from me, but here I am just beveling the edges and a little snippet of me just burning in the new bungs. All right, here I am installing the new drag link with the new pitman arm and the new tie rod end. All right, first I'm just putting the keys in the ignition so the wheel will turn. I'm gonna adjust the drag link accordingly. Here's a time lapse of me just adjusting the drag length. There's more to it, but this is the short version. All right, so the Jeep still didn't drive good after doing all the rear suspension and the front steering, and it was driving me nuts. I haven't adjusted the lower control arms in quite a long time, so I decided to pop them off, put them in the vise, and tighten up those joints. And the joints were super sloppy, so I'm glad I did that. I used parts mic joints, and they utilize the Rubicon Express Superflex joints. They're super easy to tighten up, and it made the steering feel a lot better. But even at this point, it still wasn't enough to get it to drive straight. I did, of course, change the coils, the leaves, the shocks, all the steering. I did need to adjust and give it more caster after this. Speaking of caster, I ended up having to give it about 2 degrees more caster. It was reading 6.4 on the driver's side and like 7.5 on the passenger side, which was kind of weird. I think someone had cut and turned the passenger knuckle to account for the crown of the road in the past. So one of the reasons I like these parts mic joints so much is because they use Rubicon Express large Superflex joint races, which are really cheap and easy to get. I also like them because you can tighten up these flex joints. This one was super sloppy. The other side was sloppy too, but this is like a lot. So 2 things. If you need to go very small increments, use a breaker bar and just barely turn that thing, because this thing's gonna shoot it way past your mark. The other thing is I like to put the dowel pin section on the hole that I'm actively using to make sure that I know exactly where that hole is, because that'll line it up perfectly. Can't see at all. I'm pretty sure that I haven't tightened these since I got them. I'm gonna measure this side too, because this arm visually looks bent to me. Yep. Hair short on this side, but I think I did them. So. All right, so the mount on that side is a little gummed up and it's hard to get the arm in and out. So I'm gonna take a flap wheel and just clean off some of the metal that kind of got bent upward just a little bit. I've tried to bend that side out multiple times. It's been hammered a bunch with big rocks. And so usually just a little touch up with the flap wheel gets some of that misshapen metal flat enough to get the arm back in there easily. All right, so I pretty much have to do this on the passenger side every time I take the arms off, and that is basically just taking a flap wheel and grinding down the rough edges that appear after you hit those things on rocks a lot. Otherwise, you can't get the arm back in there. All right, I'm rocking the axle back and forth right here to try to get the holes to line up. Pretty standard for lining up lower control arms. I use punches and drifts to help line things up. So, found a lot of stuff going on. One of the jam nuts. Hey, I just wanted to apologize for wearing the headlamp and blinding you folks today. Sorry about that. Jam nuts seemed tight, but when I was turning that arm, it was rotating. So I got to check all the jam nuts. All the Superflex joints on the parts mic joints were loose, and so we tightened those up. I'm going to tighten up the jam nuts and then go for a test drive and see if that fixes my issue, because we just redid the whole rear suspension, pretty much the whole front suspension, other than these arms and the front coils, shocks, Heim joints, tie rod ends, pitman arm, rebuilt the ram, new Ruffstuff shackle boxes, new Rubicon leaves. I didn't replace the rear shocks, but they seemed fine. The fronts were definitely blown out. They were just old and beat up, 5125s. They were great. They lasted a long time for what this thing is. I bet you, I'm hoping the last little bit of my slop in the steering is those loose Superflex joints along with the jam nuts. At least one of these jam nuts wasn't tight, so we'll figure that out. loose on this arm, and both of the rod ends on this arm were super loose compared to the other arm, and the other arm was loose too. So yeah, let's take it for a drive. I might not have to deal with more toe-in issues or swap the tires around, do a tire rotation. I might just be fine now. I've got a list of things. Drag link, sway bar, just try a different hole in the sway bar. Toe in, rotate tires, tire pressure, lower control arm joints. And the thing that I thought that I haven't touched probably 2 years are those lower control arm joints. So hopefully that does it. So did get the leaves on there, got some new Ruffstuff U-bolts, some Ruffstuff rear shackle boxes, a bunch of FK Heims for the front over at Parts Mike. Made a new drag link, ended up putting a tie rod end on the pitman arm side with a new pitman arm that has a longer throw, longer than stock. Tried to match the throw of the Dana 60 knuckles for the first time in years. It does seem to drive amazing now, but it took a lot of work. I played with toe in, toe out settings. It was still wandering really bad. I ended up throwing 2 degrees more caster at it, and that was after rebuilding the lower control arms because the flex joints were super loose and sloppy, and so took the arms off, tightened those up. So I think it's as good as it's going to get with the Ram rebuild, everything. It drives really good now. It just took a lot of people would say 6 degrees of caster on the driver's side, 7.5 on the passenger. Seems like a good number. It just wasn't enough to keep it straight in the lane. Going up to 8 degrees on the driver and closer to 9.5 degrees on the passenger because their knuckles are a little bit offset. Seems to be a good spot. I'm reluctant to go past 8. I could always go past 8 degrees if I need to on that driver's side, but that's going to put the passenger side well above 10 degrees. So I think I'm going to leave it there for now. Repairing pretty much the driver's side rear shackle mount and the passenger side front leaf mount, along with new leaves, new U-bolts, all that stuff. Definitely helped. It had really bad rear steer. The front was super sloppy. The thing drives like night and day better. So I'm super pumped. I'm hoping I can get through some of this head stuff that I'm dealing with, some of these migraines and these constant headaches. And when I don't have them, I come out here and wrench, work on cars. Sometimes I just get 1 day a week to do that. So I'm hoping they start to go away soon because I do want to get out there and wheel this thing. Just haven't been able to yet. I do have a bunch of trips planned for the Wrangler because that thing drives really good. It's really comfortable, has working air conditioning, heated seats. It just drives good. Even if I'm having like a headache, it's not like stressful. Whereas this thing is kind of stressful to drive if you're having a bad headache and it doesn't go away for 12 hours. I'm not super pumped to be in this. Whereas the Wrangler, I feel fine. I can kind of just deal with that. Anyways, yeah, stay tuned and go wheel. Please, if you haven't already, subscribe, comment below, do all the stuff that people like to do on YouTube to get followers. Yeah, I'm trying to grow the channel, so I appreciate the help. I'm hoping to get a lot of wheeling in this summer once things mellow out with my head. So anyways, yeah, appreciate it, guys.